Hello and welcome. The smell hits you first. Somewhere between copper and rain-soaked stone, with something beneath it you cannot quite name. Something ancient and electric and alive. You have walked through a door, perhaps a simple wooden frame wedged into the back of a crumbling alley. Perhaps an archway of moss-eaten stone. Perhaps nothing more than a chalk-drawn circle on the floor of a forgotten cellar, somewhere deep below a city that no longer remembers its own name. You stepped through without entirely meaning to. And now the air is different. Now a city breathes around you. This is Sigil, the city of doors, the cage, the center of everything, or so they say. And when you tilt your head back and look up at what passes for the sky here, you begin to understand why. Before we dive into the details, please consider subscribing to the channel. It is the surest way to find your path back to our library of lore when you wake. Section 1. The city at the heart of everything. There is no sky. Not really. What curves above you impossibly is more city. Streets and rooftops and towers and bridges made of iron and bone and timber and glass and stone, all curving upward and over and continuing on the far side, rising like the inner wall of a hollow ring, so that if you follow the arc of it all the way around, you would eventually be looking down at the very rooftop you are standing on right now. The city is a ring, a torus, a loop with no beginning and no end. Streets that begin at your feet curve gently upward into a ceiling of more streets, more windows glowing amber, more laundry strung between the eaves of buildings that have no right to exist where they are. The horizon does not end in distance. The horizon ends in more Sigil, rising above you in a slow, perpetual curve until it becomes the ceiling of the world. There is no sun here. There is no moon. The light of Sigil comes from nowhere in particular and everywhere at once. A diffuse, sourceless glow that shifts between the color of late afternoon and the color of just before dawn, cycling slowly through a day that follows no planetary rhythm. Sometimes it dims, sometimes it brightens. The city breathes light the way a sleeping creature breathes air, slow and unconscious and indifferent to your presence. Take a breath. Let the wrongness of this place settle into your bones slowly, like cold water filling a stone vessel. Because here is the truth of it. You are not standing on a planet. You are not standing beneath a sky. You are standing inside the cap of an infinite spire that rises from the dead center of the Outlands, which is itself the dead center of the great wheel of the outer planes. And the outer planes are the most distant shores of everything that is, where belief becomes landscape, and where the souls of the dead walk toward their fates. You should understand the Outlands if you want to understand Sigil, because one cannot exist without the other. The Outlands are the great neutral plane, the place between all other planes, the gray and rolling expanse where philosophy and geography are the same thing. Walk toward the rim of the Outlands in any direction, and you will eventually find yourself approaching one of the outer planes. Walk far enough toward Law, and you will feel the architecture becoming more rigid, the roads more straight, the skies more ordered. Walk toward Chaos, and the ground itself begins to forget what it was supposed to be. Every step outward is a step toward an extreme. And so every step inward, back toward the center, is a step toward balance. At the absolute center of the Outlands, rising from the ground like a needle aimed at the throat of whatever might be above, is the spire. A pillar of dark stone, impossibly narrow, impossibly tall. It has no top that anyone can reach by climbing. No dragon can fly high enough to find its peak. No spell of levitation carries a traveler far enough upward to see where it ends. It simply rises and rises, and continues rising into a sky that gets no closer. And yet, somehow, at the top of this infinite column of stone, there is a city. Nobody climbs to Sigil. Nobody flies up to it. You do not arrive in Sigil by ascending. You arrive through a door, because doors are what Sigil is made of. They are its bones, its heartbeat, its reason for existing. Portals are everywhere in this city, set into walls and floors, and the arches beneath bridges, tucked into the backs of wardrobes and the frames of market stalls. Each one connects Sigil to somewhere else in the multiverse. And because of this, Sigil is the meeting point of everything. Every plane, every world, every realm of existence can be reached, if you know which door to step through and what key to carry. The city itself sits on the inside of a torus-shaped ring of stone, and the scale of it is staggering. No one has ever produced an official measurement that all scholars agree on. But what most experienced cagers will tell you is that the city is vast enough to feel genuinely endless at street level. Home to hundreds of thousands of beings at any given moment. Perhaps more. The population shifts constantly, because the population of Sigil is never a fixed thing. People arrive through portals every hour of every day. People leave through portals just as often. Sigil exhales merchants and explorers and refugees, and planar scholars and warriors and thieves, and then breathes in a fresh tide of them from 1,000 different worlds. Walk with me through the streets for a moment. Not the fine cobblestones of the wealthier districts, but the raw, wet lanes of the older parts of the city, where the buildings lean together overhead like old friends sharing secrets, where the gutters run with water that might have last seen daylight on a plane you have never heard of. Merchants call out in a dozen languages. A Githyanki warrior with silver armor and cold, calculating eyes haggles over a piece of dried meat. A tiefling child with small red horns and careful, watchful eyes sits on a doorstep, reading a book of philosophical treatises. A being made entirely of living shadow slips between two market stalls, without disturbing a single piece of fabric. Everyone comes to Sigil eventually. This is what the residents say, and they say it with the weary confidence of people who have seen enough of the universe to believe it completely. Gods, demons, angels, mortals, undead, constructs, embodied concepts, and things that defy every category you have ever learned. All of them eventually pass through a door and find themselves breathing that copper andrane air. But there is one thing you should know before you go any further. One thing that defines Sigil more than its impossible architecture, more than its infinite doors, more than its population of every imaginable species and alignment. Sigil has a ruler. She did not elect herself. She did not conquer the city. She simply is, in the way that the spire simply is, in the way that the city's ring of stone simply is. Her name is the Lady of Pain. She floats through these streets in silence, masked and robed, and when her shadow falls across the stones, the people nearby move away from it, carefully and without making a scene about it. There are stories about what her shadow does to those who stand too long within it. And most of the people who have lived here long enough have decided that being the kind of person who tests those stories is the kind of person who ends up as a cautionary example. But you are here, and the city is already pulling you inward, already wrapping its streets around you the way a dream wraps itself around a sleeping mind. Section 2. The Factions and the Philosophy Wars. The streets of Sigil have always been loud with argument. Not the ugly, fist-swinging kind of argument that happens in taverns when someone has had too much cheap wine, but the deeper, more dangerous kind. The kind where two people look at the same sky and disagree about what it means. The kind where a philosophy becomes a weapon, and a belief becomes a faction, and a faction becomes an institution with a headquarters and a treasury and armed members who are very serious about what they think is true. For most of the city's remembered history, Sigil was governed not by kings or councils or appointed ministers, but by 15 philosophical organizations, each one convinced, to varying degrees, and with varying amounts of aggression, that they had figured out the fundamental nature of the multiverse. 15 factions, 15 answers to the same enormous question. And every single one of them shared the same cramped, impossible, looping city. Imagine what that felt like. To walk through the market district and pass in the space of a single block through the territory of 2 or 3 different philosophies, each one radiating its beliefs outward into the architecture and the fashion and the tone of voice of every member you encountered. Philosophy in Sigil was never abstract. It was lived, It was worn on the body and built into the bricks of buildings. It was in the way a dustman looked at you, slow and patient and faintly sad. It was in the way a sensate leaned toward the nearest smell with their whole face, drinking in experience with a kind of desperate joy. Belief here had texture and weight. Belief here had an address. The Athar, who called themselves the Defiers, or simply the Lost, made their home in what had once been the most sacred building in all of Sigil. The shattered temple, a ruin of cracked marble and broken archways deep in the lower ward, had once been a grand house of worship for a god named Eoskar, a divine being associated with portals and passage. The Lady of Pain destroyed Eoskar, or did something to him that amounted to the same thing, and left his temple as rubble and ruin. The Athar moved into the rubble with a kind of pointed satisfaction, because their entire philosophy rested on a single conviction. The gods, all of them, every gleaming divine being that accepted prayers and granted spells and demanded worship, were not truly gods. They were simply powerful, very powerful, impossibly powerful in many cases, but powerful in the way that a great wizard is powerful, not in the way that a true cosmic foundation is powerful. The Athar believed something deeper existed beneath the theater of divinity, some actual bedrock of reality that the gods themselves were merely standing on, and they intended to find it. They walked the astral plane, that silver sea where the dead husks of slain gods drifted like sleeping whales, and they gathered their evidence, and they sat in their ruined temple beneath broken carvings of a dead portal god, and they felt, perhaps, that the ruins around them were the most honest sermon in the city. Just a short distance from the shattered temple, still within the lower ward, the great foundry filled the surrounding streets with a constant, rhythmic clanging and smoke that smelled of hot metal and purpose. This was the home of the believers of the Source, known to most cagers as the Godsmen, where the Athar looked up at the gods with skepticism. The Godsmen looked up at the gods with something closer to ambition. Their philosophy held that every living being was on a journey of spiritual ascent, being refined through every life and every death, shaped by experience the way raw ore is shaped by heat and hammer, until eventually, after enough cycles, enough lives, enough suffering and learning and reaching, a being could transcend entirely and become something divine. Not merely powerful, actually divine. The Godsmen believed that the gods walking the outer planes right now had once been mortals, just like you, just like the beggar at the corner of the street, just like the tiefling child reading philosophy on a doorstep. And the great foundry was their symbol of all of it. Every swing of every hammer was a reminder that refinement takes work, takes heat, takes pressure. Every piece of metal shaped in those fires was a quiet sermon about the nature of the soul. The bleak cabal had no such hope to offer you, and they were honest about it. Called the Bleakers, or sometimes the Madmen, they maintained their headquarters at the Gatehouse in the Hive Ward, a vast and sprawling institution that served simultaneously as their philosophical home and as Sigil's primary asylum. Because the Bleakers had looked at the multiverse, with all its planes and factions and philosophies and divine conflicts, and arrived at a conclusion that felt like cold water thrown across the face at midnight. There is no meaning. There is no grand order, no cosmic purpose, no hidden truth waiting to be uncovered. The multiverse simply exists, without reason, without intention, without design. And the factions that argue over its meaning are arguing over nothing. But here is what separated the Bleakers from simple despair. They did not collapse under this knowledge. They used it. If there is no meaning, then suffering has no greater justification either. And so the only reasonable response is compassion. You help the person in front of you, not because some divine law demands it, not because some reward awaits you in a higher cycle of existence, but because they are hurting and you are here. The Gatehouse was full of beings who had gone mad from too much thinking, too much planar travel, too many answers that refused to line up. And the Bleakers cared for them, gently, quietly, with no promise of meaning at the end of it. Now cross with me to the ladies' ward, because several of the most powerful factions kept their headquarters in the finest part of the city, and the contrast between their philosophies and their prestigious addresses is one of Sigil's most reliable ironies. The Doomguard, called the Sinkers, maintained the armory right there in the ladies' ward, surrounded by the clean-cut stone and the wide streets of the city's wealthiest district. They believed in entropy, in the slow and inevitable unwinding of all things, in the fact that everything created will one day be destroyed, and that this was not a tragedy, but a natural truth as valid as any other. They did not worship destruction exactly, but they respected it, the way some people respect the sea. The armory was Sigil's central weapons depot, and the Doomguard had won the right to hold it through centuries of careful politics, and the implicit understanding that these were people who knew weapons extremely well. If you needed arms in Sigil, you went to the Sinkers, and you did so aware that the people selling you those weapons believed, on a philosophical level, that the best outcome for the multiverse was a quiet, gradual return to nothing. The Fraternity of Order occupied the city court in the ladies' ward and served as Sigil's judges and legal advocates. The governors, as they were called, believed that power lived in knowledge, specifically in the knowledge of laws. Not just the laws of cities and courts, though those mattered, but the deeper laws, the rules that governed how spells functioned, how physics moved between planes, how magic bent around certain conditions, and stiffened under others. If you learned the rules completely enough, they believed, you could exploit them absolutely. Every loophole was a doorway. Every technical reading of a cosmic law was a lever. The governors were brilliant, often insufferable, and almost always the most useful people in the room. The harmonium kept the city barracks in the ladies' ward and enforced Sigil's laws with the quiet intensity of people who had decided their philosophy justified every method available to them. They called themselves the Hardheads, and their creed was peace through unity. Universal peace, achieved by bringing everyone into alignment. They believed that conflict came from difference, and that if every being in the multiverse could be brought to the same understanding of what was right and orderly, war and suffering would end. The fact that this required the abolition of disagreement entirely was something they had already made their peace with. The Mercy Killers, housed in the prison, believed in justice the way a blade believes in its edge. Total impartial without mercy, because mercy was, to them, a distortion of justice. A crime demanded a punishment. The sentence mattered more than the circumstances. They were the executioners of Sigil, the jailers, the ones who showed up when the law had finally finished deliberating and needed someone to carry out the verdict without flinching. The Dustmen were calmer than the Doomguard, and in some ways that made them more unsettling. They believed that true existence, true freedom, was death. Not necessarily the violent kind. Death as release. Death as the end of the illusion of life. A state of craving and sensation and attachment that kept beings trapped in cycles of suffering. True death was the goal, a peaceful dissolution. And in the meantime, the Dustmen practiced a kind of living death, stripping away emotion and desire as much as possible, moving through the world like very patient ghosts waiting for permission to stop. They ran the mortuary in the Hive Ward, the enormous building where Sigil's dead were processed and prepared, and it suited them in every way. The fated, sometimes called the Takers, occupied the Hall of Records in the Market Ward and served as Sigil's tax collectors. Their philosophy was bracingly direct. You have the right to what you can take and what you can hold. The multiverse does not owe anyone anything. Success is proof of worth. If you were poor and weak, that was information about you. If you were powerful and clever, the universe had already cast its vote in your favor. They were, as you might expect, exceptional at bureaucracy. Moving to the clerk's ward, the sign of one held the Hall of Speakers, which served as Sigil's legislature. Their philosophy was breathtaking in its audacity. Each individual was the center of their own universe, literally, such that the cosmos was in some sense a product of the perceiving mind, and a sufficiently powerful imagination could reshape reality. every being was, in a sense, a god of their own cosmos. The question was whether you believed it strongly enough to make it true. The Society of Sensation ran the Civic Festhal, also in the Clerk's Ward, a building that was at once an art gallery, a library of sensory experiences, a theater, and a music hall. They believed that experience was the only truth. Every sensation, every sight and sound and taste and touch and emotion was a piece of the cosmic puzzle. They collected experiences the way other factions collected arguments, cataloging feelings no one else had ever felt, and always looking for new entries. The Revolutionary League had no fixed headquarters, and this was by design. They believed in the destruction of all factions, all hierarchies, all structures of power, including, somewhat awkwardly, themselves. They operated in small, disconnected cells, so that no arrest or betrayal could unravel the whole. They were the anarchists, present everywhere and visible nowhere. The transcendent order trained at the great gymnasium in the Guildhall Ward, and believed in the elimination of thought between intention and action. If you could move fast enough, feel deeply enough, act so cleanly that no deliberation came between the moment and the response, you had found a kind of enlightenment. Pure reflex, perfect, thoughtless harmony with the flow of the multiverse. They produced the best fighters in Sigil, which was useful, and the most serene people in the city, which was slightly eerie. The Free League, the faction that refused to be a faction, gathered informally in the great bazaar in the Market Ward, because the bazaar was as close to a shared belief as they could manage, which was the belief that no one should be telling you what to believe. No factol, no headquarters, no doctrine. Just independent merchants and wanderers and scholars who had looked at the other 14 factions and found them all equally bossy. And last, the ZOC texts, who called the Hive Ward home because no other part of the city would quite have them. They believed that chaos was the only truth. Order was a lie. Pattern was a hallucination. They spoke in reversed sentences sometimes. They showed up to philosophical debates without any particular philosophy, just enthusiasm. They were, in the words of nearly everyone who had ever encountered them, completely unmoored from conventional sense. And they were, strangely, beloved in the Hive, because chaos in a city as strange as Sigil had a kind of honesty that more organized philosophies sometimes lacked. 15 factions, 15 truths, and for generations they coexisted in a tension that was sometimes productive and sometimes violent, but always present. Every ward of the city carried the fingerprints of 2 or 3 competing philosophies. Every piece of civic infrastructure was staffed by members of a faction who had their own agenda embedded inside the function. The tax collector was a faded, The judge was a governor. The jailer was a mercy killer. The asylum attendant was a bleaker. The city worked because all these competing forces balanced each other out, usually just barely, like a wheel that stays round, because every spoke pushes outward with exactly the same force. And then the wheel broke. The faction war arrived the way most catastrophes arrive in Sigil, through a door that nobody fully saw opening. What historians of the event point to as the match that lit the fire is the ambition of Duke Darkwood, Factal of the Fated, who moved against the other factions with the full force of his faction's institutional power. Based on what we know of the lead-up, the other tensions that had been simmering for years, it is reasonable to think that Darkwood believed the moment had finally arrived when one faction could seize what all 15 had been quietly competing over for centuries, which was control of Sigil itself. Whether he expected the scope of what followed is a question that, given what happened next, he likely never had the peace to answer properly. The streets of Sigil became a battlefield. Factions that had shared the city for centuries turned on each other with weapons and magic, and the full weight of their philosophical conviction. 3 factions were destroyed entirely in the fighting. The believers of the source were wiped out. The mercy killers were destroyed. The sign of one was obliterated. 6 others fell apart in the aftermath. The Bleak Cabal, the Dustmen, the Free League, the Society of Sensation, the Transcendent Order, and the Zaoc Texts, all disbanded or scattered, their members surviving but their institutional identities gone. The remaining 6 factions, the Athar, the Doomguard, the Fated, the Fraternity of Order, the Harmonium, and the Revolutionary League, each chose to leave Sigil, not because they were driven out in the conventional sense. They chose to go, departing to the outer planes most aligned with their philosophies, reading, perhaps correctly, the silence of the Lady of Pain as a verdict rather than a pause. Because when the fighting finally ended, when the smoke had cleared and the bodies had been counted, and the streets of the Hive and the Ladies' Ward had been scrubbed of the evidence of what had happened, the Lady of Pain communicated her decision in the only language she ever uses: presence. The factions were done as governing bodies. No faction would hold a civic post in Sigil again. The city would be governed by elected civil servants, and any faction that tried to reassert the institutional authority it once enjoyed would be given a very direct and personal reminder of what the Lady of Pain is capable of, from a distance close enough to make the point impossible to misunderstand. The city survived. It always does. But the Sigil that emerged from the faction war was quieter in some ways, louder in others, and carrying a grief that the streets still hold onto, the way old stone holds onto cold long after the season has changed. Section 3. The Wards of the Cave. The city does not reveal itself all at once. It has too much pride for that, and too many centuries of accumulated secrets. Sigil unfolds the way. A conversation unfolds with someone who has lived a very long life and is not in any hurry to tell you the most important parts. You have to walk it. You have to let the streets carry you from one mood to another, from one smell to the next, and trust that the city is showing you something true in the transition, in the movement between what it was and what it has become. There are 6 wards in Sigil, not 7, not 12, not some shifting number that changes with the tides of opinion. 6, and each one is its own country in miniature, its own atmosphere, its own relationship with the rest of the city. The borders between them are not always marked by walls or gates or official signage. They are marked by something subtler. The sound of the street changes. The quality of the light shifts by some fraction of a degree. The smell of the air tells you something new. You know you have crossed from one ward to another the same way you know when a piece of music has moved into a different key. Nothing dramatic, just a change in the feeling beneath everything. Begin at the top, in the ward that considers itself the natural beginning of everything worth knowing in Sigil. The ladies' ward is the finest district in the city, and it knows this the way only very old and very wealthy places know things, without saying it directly, without needing to. It simply presents itself to you with a kind of immaculate confidence. The streets here are wide and kept clean by workers whose employment is considered prestigious enough that there is a waiting list for it. The buildings are made of stone cut and fitted with more precision than you usually see in a city that is, technically, balanced on the tip of an infinite spire. There are fountains, not the broken, dry, pigeon-haunted kind of fountain you find in other parts of the city, but working fountains, with water that catches the diffuse, sourceless light of Sigil's false sky and throws it back in small, sparkling arcs. The great institutions of Sigil's prefaction war history stood here, and many of their buildings still do, repurposed now, restaffed, but wearing their histories the way old soldiers wear their scars, quietly and visibly, and without any particular interest in explaining them to you. The city court, where the Fraternity of Order once held its sessions and argued over the finer points of cosmic law for audiences of bored clerks and fascinated planar scholars. The prison, a structure of such monumental grimness that it seems to pull surrounding light into itself, even now, when its mercikiller administrators are long gone. The city barracks, once the drilling ground and philosophical home of the harmonium, where the corridors still echo with the footsteps of people who walked them with the absolute certainty that their way of thinking about the world was the right one, and everyone else simply had not been shown the evidence properly yet. And there in the ladies' ward, commanding space, the way only institutions backed by centuries of physical force tend to command space, stood the armory, the Doomguard's great weapons depot, a building of dark stone and heavy iron that housed the largest stockpile of arms in the city. Even now, with the Doomguard gone to the outer planes and the armory under civic management, it sits in the heart of the wealthiest ward like a reminder that the city's peace has always been a negotiated thing. That beauty and wealth and clean-swept streets exist here because the means of ending them exist here too, under lock and key, and the supervision of people who understand that a weapon is a kind of argument made material. The defining presence of the ladies' ward is not any of these institutions, though. It is a space rather than a structure. At the ward's center, a plaza of dark stone that the residents call the ladies' square sits immaculate and open, swept and tended with a reverence that has nothing written behind it and nothing official sanctioning it. The Lady of Pain has been seen here more often than anywhere else in the city. Nobody erected a shrine. Nobody was foolish enough to try. They simply keep the square clean, because keeping it clean is what you do when the alternative is being the person who let it fall into disrepair. The people of the ladies' ward are wealthy. Some of them are godlike in their wealth, having accumulated resources across multiple planes and multiple lifetimes. Archons who have stepped down from the structured service of Mount Celestia. Powerful wizards who can afford a mailing address that impresses people on 17 different planes. Former planar diplomats who decided that neutral territory suited them better than the fringes of the wheel. They move through the ward with the leisurely authority of beings who have never once in their lives had to run for a portal. Now let the ladies' ward fall behind you and move in the direction the city's curve takes you next. Because what follows is a significant change in temperature, in smell, in the entire quality of the air. The lower ward presses in around you almost immediately, and the contrast is deliberate in the way that only a city as old and strange as Sigil can make a contrast feel deliberate. This is the industrial heart of Sigil. The smelters run without pause. The forges breathe fire and smoke through iron-shuttered windows, and the light that comes out of them is orange and restless, and nothing like the sourceless, settled glow of the rest of the city. The streets here are dark with centuries of accumulated grime, and the heat is a physical presence that leans against you as you walk, not unbearably, but insistently, the way a crowd leans when it has somewhere it needs to be. The lower ward is where the portals to the lower planes cluster most densely. This may not be coincidence. The scholars who study Sigil's planar geography have noted that the industrial and infernal tend toward each other in this city with a regularity that suggests either some underlying cosmological preference, or perhaps more practically, a long history of commerce between the crafting guilds of Sigil and the resource-rich and morally flexible markets of Gehenna and Acheron and the Nine Hells. The result is a ward where it is entirely unremarkable to pass a devil completing an errand and a human smith heading to work within the same 10 steps, both of them moving with the focused indifference of people who have deadlines and no time for philosophy. The shattered temple stands in the lower ward, and even in its state of deliberate ruin, it carries a gravity that the surrounding industrial noise cannot entirely absorb. This was Eoskar's house. Eoskar, whose name is still spoken in Sigil with a particular kind of careful quietness, was a god who claimed dominion over portals and passage, a divine being uniquely suited to a city whose entire identity is built around doorways. What precisely happened between Eoskar and the Lady of Pain is something that even the most meticulous scholars can only approach from the edges. The Athar, who made the temple ruins their home and their sermon in stone, believed that the lady's destruction of Eoskar said something fundamental about the nature of divinity and its limits. Whether that interpretation is correct, or whether it simply suited the Athar's existing convictions, is the kind of question that Sigil generates constantly and answers almost never. The great foundry rises not far from the shattered temple within the same ward, and the contrast between the two buildings could not be more pointed if someone had arranged it intentionally. Where the shattered temple is ruin and quiet and philosophical negative space, the great foundry is noise and heat and productive purpose. The hammers ring, the metal pours. The godsmen worked here under the belief that refinement through labor was a spiritual act, that the soul was shaped by the same forces that shaped metal, and that every life was another pass under the hammer. The foundry still operates. It always has. Some institutions survive their philosophies. Step further along the ward's curve, and the noise of the forges fades into a different kind of ambient sound, a lower, more human register, the sound of many lives lived in close proximity. The hive ward comes next in the city's ring, and if the lower ward is where Sigil works, the hive ward is where Sigil lives. Specifically, it is where Sigil's most recently arrived, most economically precarious, and most socially complicated residents make their lives. The hive is where you end up when you step through a portal with nothing but your wits and your traveling clothes and need somewhere to be while you figure out what comes next. The roads are uneven here. The buildings lean together overhead as though sharing warmth or secrets, and sometimes it is hard to tell which. Portals open without ceremony into walls and floors, and on one particular street in a lower lane, into the ceiling of a bakery that has simply incorporated the situation into its layout. With a sign above the portal frame that reads, in 3 languages, that the destination is cold, and customers should be aware that the resulting draft is not a fault in the building's construction. The hive is a city within a city, with its own internal geography that defeats most maps, because it was never built to a plan and has been continuously modified by residents who had priorities other than cartographic legibility. The mortuary stands at one end of the hive, massive and dark, and smelling faintly of the herbs used in the preservation of bodies, a smell that drifts into the surrounding streets and becomes, after enough years, simply part of the neighborhood's particular atmosphere. The dustmen ran this place with their characteristic quiet, receiving Sigil's dead with the solemn efficiency of beings who considered death not a problem to be solved, but a destination to be properly managed. The mortuary still processes the city's dead. The current staff have somewhat more conventional views about mortality, but the building itself remembers what it was used for and by whom, in the way that old buildings remember the weight of their histories without being able to do anything about it. The gatehouse marks the hive ward's edge, and it is as different from the mortuary as 2 large, serious buildings can be. Where the mortuary deals in endings, the gatehouse deals in persistence. It is an asylum built to house and care for the beings who have been broken by the plains, the ones who heard the howl of pandemonium and could not stop hearing it afterward, the ones who stared too long into the astral plane and came back with someone else's thoughts mixed in with their own, the ones who crossed through a portal into a situation so far outside their capacity to process that their minds simply stopped trying to process it in any conventional way. The gatehouse receives them all without judgment about why they ended up there, without promise of any particular outcome, with only the steady, practical compassion of a place that has been doing this work for a very long time. The hive at street level is a labyrinth, not the organized, deliberate kind with a monster at the center and a prize for finding the exit, but the organic kind. The kind that grows when hundreds of thousands of beings over hundreds of years have simply built wherever there was room. Streets that start wide and gradually narrow to a single-file passage, and then open again into a courtyard that is not on any map, because it did not exist when any map was made. Tiny shrines tucked into alcoves, improvised bridges spanning lanes too narrow for proper construction equipment. The ZOC texts were most comfortable here, and their spirit lingers in the particular quality of the hive's chaos, which is not frightening and not oppressive, but alive, in the way that things that have never been forced into order are sometimes more alive than the things that have. Continue along the ring, and the city shifts again. And the shift is pronounced enough that first-time visitors often stop and look around to confirm that they have, in fact, crossed into somewhere different. The clerk's ward announces itself with the scratching sound of quills on paper, which is not literally audible from the street, but somehow feels present anyway. This is the district of scholars and scribes and advocates and archivists, the place where the administrative memory of Sigil lives. The streets are narrower here than in the ladies' ward, but tidier than in most other districts, lined with buildings that house offices on the lower floors and apartments on the upper ones. And the distinction between the two is sometimes blurry in a way that suggests the people who work here have a complicated relationship with the concept of going home. The civic festival stands in the clerk's ward, and even after the Society of Sensation lost its factional standing, the festival remained the cultural heart of the city. It is enormous and more complex inside than its exterior suggests, which is a recurring theme in Sigil. Beyond what could generously be called a lobby, the festival opens into a network of galleries and theaters and experience archives, libraries of recorded sensation that patrons can access through magical means, feeling the specific quality of light on the surface of the astral plane just before a dead god drifts into view, tasting a fruit that grows only in a single valley on a plain 3 gate jumps away, hearing a song sung once in a language that no one has spoken for 1,000 years. The sensates began it. The city absorbed it. It now belongs to everyone with enough coin for the entry fee and enough presence of mind not to lose themselves in the archives for longer than is healthy. The Hall of Speakers stands in the clerk's ward too, large and formal, and filled with the echoes of 10,000 arguments that were all slightly too long. The sign of one once held it, presiding over legislative functions with the peculiar confidence of a faction that believed reality was fundamentally a product of individual perception. After the faction war stripped the building of its factional character, it became a proper civic legislature for the city's elected officials. The arguments that fill it now are no longer philosophical in the grand sense, but political in the grinding, practical one, which is arguably more exhausting and only occasionally more useful. Move further along, and the sound of craft work begins before you can see its source. A complex layering of hammer and saw and the thin, high note of a grinding wheel. And beneath it, all the comfortable low hum of people doing work they are genuinely good at. The Guildhall ward does not present itself loudly. It does not need to. This is the district of makers, not traders. The craftspeople whose guilds are ancient and protective of their knowledge, and deeply invested in the quality of what they produce. The buildings have the comfortable thickness of structures built by people who plan to stay, with wide doorways designed for moving large pieces of finished work in and out, and upper windows angled to catch whatever light the sourceless sky is currently providing and directed usefully downward onto workbenches. A Sigil-made lock is a particular thing, sought by buyers on a dozen planes for the extra quality that comes from materials and techniques gathered from across the whole of the wheel. A Sigil-forged instrument is the same. The Guildhall ward is where that cross-planar expertise accumulates and concentrates. The great gymnasium stood in this ward, the training ground of the transcendent order, and the building continues in its function, if not in its original purpose. The ciphers drilled here in the pursuit of action without deliberation, attempting through practice and meditation and physical refinement to reduce the distance between intention and movement to nothing at all. What remains is a gymnasium in the more conventional sense, open to the ward's residents, still staffed by instructors who hold some version of the cipher philosophy, in the way that buildings hold the shapes of the people who used to inhabit them, as an outline, a residue, something that influences the atmosphere without announcing itself. And last, completing the ring, pressing up against the edges of the ladies' ward where it began. The market ward fills the remaining space of Sigil's torus with the specific, urgent, never quite resolving noise of commerce. The market ward is noise and motion, and the particular kind of chaos that comes not from disorder, but from too much order trying to exist in the same space at the same time. Every trader who comes through a portal wants to sell what they brought. Every merchant who lives here wants to buy low and sell high. Every guild with an interest in controlling what moves through Sigil's infinite doors wants a representative at the negotiating table. The market ward is where all of these forces meet and push against each other, and somehow, against all reasonable expectation, produce commerce. The Great Bazaar is the beating heart of it, an open market of staggering scale, where the stalls sell things you could not name if someone asked you to. Weapons from planes whose physics differs meaningfully from your own. Food from biomes that do not correspond to any terrain you have ever crossed. Books written in scripts that shift and rearrange themselves if you look at them from slightly different angles. Bottled memories, distilled emotions, jars of silence collected from the quietest places on a dozen different planes, and sold to buyers who will pay a remarkable amount for something that, by definition, they cannot show anyone. Between the stalls, buyers and sellers from every possible origin argue and calculate and gesture, and occasionally attempt to steal, at which point the ward's enforcer presence becomes suddenly very visible. The Hall of Records sits in the market ward as well, a building that served the Fated's administrative ambitions for as long as they held institutional power. As Sigil's effective tax authority, the Fated treated the hall with the reverence that people who believe in the power of possession naturally extend to the place where ownership is documented and verified. The building is still in use, still staffed by civic clerks who maintain the records of Sigil's property, commerce, and transit. Still one of the most visited and least enjoyed buildings in the ward, because nobody ever leaves a records office feeling that the visit improved their day in any significant way. This is the city entire. 6 wards, 6 moods, 6 versions of what a place could be, pressed together inside a ring of impossible stone floating above the dead center of the universe. Walk any of them long enough, and the city starts to feel less like a place and more like a question asked very slowly, in every language that has ever existed, to every kind of being that has ever lived. Section 4. The infinite portals and the keys that open worlds. Every door in Sigil is a possibility. This is not a metaphor. This is not the kind of poetic observation that sounds meaningful at a philosophical gathering and dissolves under scrutiny the next morning. It is a literal, documented, repeatedly verified fact of existence in the city of doors. Every door, every archway, every window frame, every chalk circle, every gap between 2 leaning walls where the air sits differently than it should. Any of these things could be a portal. Any one of them could be a doorway to somewhere else entirely. Not probably, not theoretically, actually, right now. The question is never whether a portal exists. The question is always whether you have the key. Stand still for a moment in the middle of any street in the city and look around you with new eyes. Really look, not at the people and the stalls and the smoke rising from the lower ward forges. Look at the spaces between things. Look at the archway over the entrance to that tavern on your left. Look at the gate in the low stone wall around that courtyard. Look at the perfectly circular shadow cast by the lip of that dry fountain. Any one of these spaces could be folded around a portal key that opens it into a destination so remote, so strange, so different from everything you know, that stepping through, it would feel like being born into a completely different version of existence. A portal key is whatever the portal requires in order to open. This is the genius and the madness of Sigil's door culture simultaneously. There is no standardization. There is no governing authority that decided what a portal key should look like, or feel like, or be made of. The portals simply are, and each one has its own requirement. And the only way to discover that requirement is to find someone who already knows it, or to pay someone to find it out for you, or to spend an enormous amount of time and patience experimenting. That last approach is a strategy that has sent more than a few optimistic planar explorers through portals they were not expecting. and into situations they had not prepared for, and occasionally into situations that nobody would have prepared for because nobody had previously survived long enough to warn anyone else. Portal keys come in every form imaginable. A specific emotion, felt genuinely in the moment of crossing. Not performed, not approximated, not remembered. Actually felt with the precise quality the portal requires. There are portals in the clerk's ward that only open when the person standing before them is experiencing genuine, unperformed nostalgia for a place they have not visited in a significant stretch of time. The portal does not respond to someone trying to feel nostalgic. It responds to someone who actually is, in the way that only people who have really been away from somewhere they loved can be. There are portals in the lower ward that require the holder to be carrying something stolen, not something purchased, not something borrowed. Stolen, and the portal knows the difference, because portals in Sigil are older than the concepts of right and wrong, and have no particular investment in either. Physical objects can be keys. A specific coin from a specific realm, carried in the left hand. A flower that only blooms on a single mountain in Arborea, pressed between 2 pages of a specific book. The shed feather of a creature that exists on only one layer of the beastlands and molts with a rarity that makes each feather a minor treasure. A stone from a river on a material plane, world that most cagers have never heard of. The entire economy of portal key trading in Sigil rests on the fact that the right object in the right hands at the right doorway is worth more than gold, more than gems, more than almost any other commodity. Key merchants occupy a particular niche in the market ward's ecosystem, somewhere between pawnbrokers and librarians, maintaining private catalogs of objects whose portal opening properties they have verified personally or purchased from someone credible enough to believe. Actions can be keys. Saying a specific phrase in a specific language at the threshold. Turning in place 3 times before stepping through. Arriving at the frame at a specific hour of Sigil's slow, sourceless day. These are the hardest portal keys for newcomers to accept, because they suggest that the portals are paying attention, that something in the fabric of Sigil is aware enough to notice whether you are doing the thing correctly, whether this constitutes genuine awareness on the portal's part, or whether it is simply a mechanical property embedded in the magic that created the portal in the first place, is one of those questions that Sigil generates effortlessly and resolves almost never. There are people in this city whose entire profession is door finding. They call themselves portal seekers, or sometimes, with the slight swagger that comes from doing a dangerous job well, doorwalkers. They carry journals so thick with annotations that the spines crack and have to be rebound regularly. Each page holds notes on a portal's location, its requirements, its destination, and anything the doorwalker found useful to know about the immediate area on the other side. How breathable the air is. How hostile the locals tend to be toward unexpected arrivals. Whether stepping through with a weapon drawn is considered polite preparation or an act of aggression, depending on local customs. The best doorwalkers command extraordinary fees, and they earn every coin, because the difference between arriving on a plane correctly and arriving incorrectly is sometimes the difference between a productive expedition and a story that other people tell as a warning. The Society of Sensation, in the years before the faction war, maintained what was arguably the most comprehensive portal catalog ever assembled. They called it the Travelogue of All Doors, and it was housed in the deep archives of the Civic Festthal in both written and sensory form. A researcher could not merely read about a portal's requirements, but experience a preserved recording of what it had felt like to stand at the threshold, to carry the key, to step through. That moment of transition, the brief dimensionless instant between departure and arrival, is something that every experienced planar traveler carries a strong opinion about. Some describe it as nothing, a simple discontinuity in experience, a breath between one sentence and the next. Others describe it as a fullness, a strange awareness of occupying more than one location, a sensation of being briefly present in the space between destinations, rather than in any destination itself. Some describe it as the most frightening thing they have ever felt, a wordless understanding of how small every place is compared to the totality of what connects it to everywhere else. The records in the Festthal archives preserve all of these accounts with equal care, without adjudicating between them, because the sensates understood that the disagreement was itself part of the data. Let me take you through one. Not the dramatic kind, not a portal that announces itself in a crack of displaced air and the smell of ozone. The quiet kind, which is most of them. There is a doorframe in the Guildhall ward, standing alone in a small courtyard between two workshop buildings. No door hung in it anymore, just the frame itself, stone and old iron fittings where hinges once lived. You have been told the key by someone who charged you more than you wanted to pay, and delivered the information with the mild contempt of a professional who has decided you are probably not going to survive the trip anyway. You carry a smooth river stone, the specific kind found in the bed of a specific river on a specific world whose name is long and contains sounds not native to your vocal anatomy. You hold the stone in your right hand. You approach the doorframe at the right hour. Nothing happens, and nothing is supposed to happen yet. You step through. The courtyard is gone. Not violently, not dramatically. It is simply gone the way a word is gone when you stop saying it. You are standing on a hillside of silver grass, and the sky above you is the deep, layered blue of the beastlands, rich as water at the center, and paling toward the horizon into something nearly white. The wind carries the smell of 1,000 living things, green and wet and completely wild. And somewhere nearby, there is a sound that might be a great cat moving through undergrowth, or might be the wind moving differently over ground you cannot see. You arrived correctly. You are standing upright. You are breathing air. You did not land in the middle of a predator's home territory, at least not as far as you can immediately determine. Today is a good day for stepping through an unfamiliar door. Every plane you can reach through Sigil's portals announces itself differently. The outer planes, the great wheel of belief-made landscape, make themselves known the moment you step through. Mount Celestia settles into your chest like a gentle weight, a feeling of being held and seen with something that is not quite love, but is close enough that the distinction stops feeling important. Gehenna leans into you the way a mountain leans, heavy and indifferent and absolutely certain of its own permanence. And the air there is sulphurous, and the slopes pitch at angles that your instincts keep insisting cannot be right. Mechanus does not impress itself upon you emotionally so much as structurally. The enormous, interlocking machinery of pure law generates a vibration at a frequency just below the threshold of conscious hearing. And your thoughts, without your permission, begin to organize themselves slightly, as though the plane itself is gently suggesting that you might benefit from a more systematic approach to whatever you were thinking about. The abyss does not arrive so much as reveal that it was already present. The upper layers, the ones most commonly accessed through Sigil's lower ward portals, carry the feeling of a room where something terrible happened and has been continuing to happen at a pace too slow to observe in a single lifetime. The chaos there is not the playful, irreverent chaos of the Zayosi texts. It is the foundational kind, the chaos that precedes pattern, that has no interest in becoming pattern, that actively resists any attempt to impose pattern upon it. Demons move through it with the ease of creatures for whom disorder is not a condition, but a home. The inner planes, the elemental foundations of physical reality, are more immediate in their impact and considerably less forgiving of improper preparation. Step through a portal to the plane of fire, and the first thing you understand is that you have, until this moment, only been experiencing a pale approximation of what heat is capable of. Fire, there is not a combustion event. It is an environment. It fills every direction. Creatures called the Efreet make their civilization within it, building their towers of black glass and brass in the heart of flames that would reduce most visitors to ash in the time it takes to finish being surprised. The Efreet are not hostile by default, but they are proud, and their pride is the architectural kind, built over millennia and reinforced by the fact that everything around them is fire, and they are perfectly comfortable. The astral plane, which connects the planes to one another, and which a traveler crosses when moving between the outer planes without using a specific portal, is perhaps the strangest transitional space in the multiverse. It is colorless in the way that potential is colorless, silver and gray, and faintly lit from no direction in particular. In the astral, time passes differently than it does elsewhere. A journey that subjectively feels like an afternoon might account for considerably longer on the planes you left behind. The dead gods drift through the silver sea in slow and eternal migration, their divine sparks extinguished, their bodies enormous beyond easy reckoning, their surfaces colonized by the Githyanki, who have carved fortresses and cities into the cold divine flesh, with a pragmatism that visitors from the material plane tend to find either deeply impressive or deeply disturbing, sometimes both, which is a fairly standard response to most things the Githyanki do. All of this is reachable from Sigil. Every layer of every plane, every color of existence that the multiverse has produced in its long, argumentative history. The portals do not discriminate. They open for anyone who carries the key. They do not ask your alignment, or your history, or your species, or your allegiance. A portal that leads to the heart of Mount Celestia will open for a pit fiend with the correct key exactly as readily as it will open for a paladin who has spent a lifetime living the values that Mount Celestia embodies. Whether the destination then welcomes you is a different question entirely, and one the portal considers completely outside its brief. There is a saying among the people who have lived in Sigil long enough to stop being surprised by most things. The city will take you anywhere. Whether anywhere wants you is your problem. It is delivered in the flat, pragmatic tone of someone who has witnessed the full range of outcomes this situation produces, and has long since decided that sympathy, while admirable, is not the same as useful advice. The culture that has grown up around the portals, the keys, and the endless movement of beings through Sigil's doors is one of the richest and most particular cultures in the multiverse. It has its own vocabulary, a slang called the cant, that every cager picks up within weeks of arriving, because not knowing it marks you immediately as a newcomer. The city calls newcomers the clueless, with a directness that residents have decided is more honest than unkind. The cant is thick, with plainer reference and layered meaning. To be mazed means to be taken by the Lady of Pain and deposited in a private extra-dimensional prison, a labyrinth of her own construction with no exit and no company, and no particular schedule for release. To go cross-trade means to work outside the law. A blood is an experienced planar traveler, someone whose judgment can be trusted in a difficult situation. A Burke is someone who has done something spectacularly foolish, a category that the streets of Sigil are never short of volunteers to fill. There are also the collectors, beings who have made it their life's work to find portals whose destinations have never been cataloged. Not necessarily to use them, just to find them, to note their locations, to add their keys and destinations to the record of what exists. The collectors are the cartographers of Sigil, but they draw maps not of streets and buildings, but of connections, networks of doorways and passages and potential journeys that, if laid out together, would look less like a city map and more like a diagram of how everything in existence relates to everything else. In Sigil, when you look at it long enough, those two things begin to seem like the same diagram drawn at different scales. The portals are the reason the city exists, not in the constructed sense, not in the sense that someone sat down with a plan and decided to build a city near some useful doorways. In the deeper sense, the city is a consequence of the portals, grew up around them the way a forest grows around water. Because where there is passage, there are travelers, and where there are travelers, there are merchants, and where there are merchants, there are philosophers arguing about what the merchants should and should not be allowed to do, and where there are philosophers arguing, there are factions forming and buildings being raised, and wards developing their own characters. And before very long, there is a city, perched on the tip of a spire above the center of everything, wearing its impossible geography, the way any very old city wears its history, with the quiet confidence of something that has already survived everything that has ever tried to surprise it. Section 5. The Lady of Pain and the Mysteries at the Core. She does not announce herself. There is no herald, no trembling of the ground, no shift in the sourceless light that would tell you something significant is about to happen. One moment, the street ahead of you is populated by the ordinary chaos of Sigil's foot traffic, tieflings and githyanki and humans, and beings that resist every category you have tried to place them in. All of them moving with the purposeful indifference of people who have somewhere to be. And then the crowd parts, not because anyone commands it, not because a voice cries out a warning. They simply move aside with the careful, practiced naturalness of people who have learned that certain things require room, and that giving that room immediately and without hesitation is not cowardice, but survival. She floats, not quickly, not with any visible urgency. She drifts through the street the way a very old thought drifts through a very old mind, slowly, with a weight that has nothing to do with speed. Her robes are dark and vast, and move in a wind that does not exist here, trailing behind her with a kind of terrible elegance. Her face, if there is a face beneath it, is hidden behind a mask of bladed iron, enormous and elaborate, a construction of metal and sharp edges that should look absurd on any being, and does not look absurd at all, not even slightly. The eye holes of the mask are empty, not dark, empty. Looking into them is not like looking into darkness. It is like looking into the place where light decided not to go and never came back. Around her, barely visible unless the sourceless light catches it at the right angle, there is a shimmer, a distortion in the air at the very edges of her form. It takes a moment to understand what you are looking at, and when you do understand it, your body responds before your mind has finished processing. The shimmer is blades, hundreds of them, impossibly thin, orbiting her in slow and constant rotation, close enough to her robes to seem almost decorative, far enough from her form to constitute a perimeter. She does not wield them. They are simply part of what she is. They are always moving. They have always been moving. Her shadow, when it falls across the street ahead of her, falls in a shape that does not quite correspond to her form. And this is where you need to pay close attention, because in Sigil, a detail like that is never decoration. It is a warning. The accounts of those who have been touched by her shadow, particularly those who had made the catastrophic error of worshiping her in the moments before, describe something that goes far beyond the cold, wrong feeling you might expect. They describe flaying. The shadow of the Lady of Pain has unmade people who stood too long within it, peeled them down to something that no longer had a form to organize itself around. The exact mechanism, whether it is something she consciously deploys or simply a property of what she is that operates independently of her awareness, is one of those questions that Sigil has generated without answering for as long as the city has had scholars willing to study the evidence. What the evidence agrees on is that you stay out of her shadow. You stay well out of it. And if it begins to fall across you, you move. Now, without ceremony, she passes. The crowd fills in behind her. The street resumes its noise and motion and smell. And you stand there for a moment longer than everyone else, because you need that extra moment to remember what your feet are for and why you came here. This is the Lady of Pain. And the first thing you must understand about her is that understanding her is not something that has been accomplished, not by the scholars who have devoted lifetimes to studying her movements and her actions, not by the gods who have tried to engage her in dialogue, not by the oldest and most powerful beings in the multiverse, who have had very long spans of time in which to form working theories, and have, consistently, not arrived at conclusions they feel confident standing behind. She has no known origin, No confirmed motivation. No recorded speech. No written doctrine. The history of Sigil stretches so far back that the earliest records are not records at all but myths. And she appears to predate even the myths, or at least to exist in a way that the myths do not seem to contain her completely. What she does, rather than what she is, provides the only framework anyone has managed to build around her. She maintains the city. This is the clearest truth available. Sigil exists because she exists, and functions as a city because she permits it. Beings who have tried to conquer Sigil, gods who looked at the city of doors and saw a strategic asset worth seizing, powers whose divine authority they believed extended to the top of the spire. All of them have encountered the Lady of Pain, and all of them have stopped, not been defeated in a celebrated battle that could be written into a saga. Simply stopped. The attempt ended in ways that were never explained and never needed to be explained, because the ending was itself the explanation. She has mazed people. This is her most consistently documented act. To be mazed is to be removed from Sigil entirely, placed inside an extra-dimensional labyrinth of the Lady's own construction. These labyrinths are private, custom, and permanent in the sense that there is no known exit from any of them that does not involve the Lady choosing to provide one. The walls are real. The space is real. The absence of any exit is real. A person who has been mazed is alive, somewhere walking corridors that have no end, with no company and no promise that the corridors will ever become anything else. The reason for a particular mazing is not always announced and not always obvious, but one pattern holds with enough consistency that the residents of Sigil have made it into an informal law of survival, passed from experienced cager to new arrival with great seriousness. Do not worship the Lady of Pain, not symbolically, not privately, not with a small candle in a corner of your room, while you tell yourself that it is not really worship, that it is more of an appreciative acknowledgement of her power. Any version of it will find her attention, and her attention in this particular context produces a one-way door. This is not speculation. The Athar, who occupy the shattered temple that the Lady left behind after destroying Easkar, hold this up as the most direct theological statement she has ever made. The god of portals built a house of worship here. She ended both the god and the worship. She is not a deity. She is not interested in being a deity. And she is particularly actively uninterested in being treated as one. Her servants are the Dabbas, and they are as much a part of Sigil's daily texture as the sourceless light and the portals in the walls. They move through the city performing maintenance, repairing stonework, tending to the infrastructure with the quiet dedication of beings who have no other purpose and require no other purpose. They are tall and pale and vaguely humanoid, and they communicate exclusively through rebuses, images that appear in the air before them and dissolve before you can fully process them. Pictographic sentences that require interpretation, patience, and a good working knowledge of symbolic logic. They have never been recorded speaking in words. Whether they can speak in words is a question that nobody has yet managed to get close enough to ask comfortably. They serve the Lady of Pain. They are of the Lady of Pain. And in serving her, they serve the city, because for the Dabbas, those are not two different things. Now let the streets go quiet for a moment, because what we need to turn toward now is the deeper architecture, the layer beneath the cobblestones and the ward boundaries and the portal frames, the thing that Sigil is actually built on, not geologically, but philosophically, the thing that makes this city matter in a way that goes beyond its role as a convenient hub for planar travel. In Planescape, belief is not metaphorical power. It is literal, structural, load-bearing power. The outer planes are built from it. The landscape of Mount Celestia, with its 7 gleaming layers, and its air that feels like being forgiven for something you did not know you were carrying, exists because enough beings across enough worlds believe that goodness and order together produce something worth ascending toward. The landscape of the abyss, with its infinite layers of chaos and malice and destruction, exists because belief in that particular configuration of evil has no floor and has never found one. The planes are not locations that beliefs describe. They are locations that beliefs create and sustain. The distinction matters enormously. The gods of the outer planes are powerful because beings believe in them, not in the soft, optional sense, where belief is a personal inclination a deity would certainly appreciate. In the direct, energetic sense, where the prayers of worshippers constitute a form of fuel, where faith is a resource that a god converts into capacity for action, a god whose congregation grows weakens proportionally, a god whose worshippers all die or convert or simply stop believing over enough generations does not merely weaken. That god eventually becomes a drifting corpse in the silver sea of the astral plane, divine spark extinguished, body enormous and cold, and no longer home to anything that thinks or acts or remembers what it used to be. This is why Sigil matters so much to every power with an interest in the planes. Every god, every faction, every planar entity with ambitions that extend beyond its immediate territory has an interest in Sigil, because Sigil is where belief moves, where people from 1,000 different worlds and 1,000 different traditions come together, argue, convert, change their minds, abandon old certainties, and adopt new ones. A god who gains worshippers in Sigil gains worshippers who travel through portals to every corner of the multiverse, carrying that faith with them the way seeds are carried on the wind. Sigil is not merely the geographic center of the wheel. It could be understood as the center of the belief economy that runs the wheel, the place where the most concentrated and diverse mass of thinking beings in all of existence lives and argues and prays and doubts and decides what it will choose to hold as true. The blood war, the eternal conflict grinding between the devils of the 9 hells and the demons of the abyss, illustrates this principle in the most catastrophic way imaginable. Devils are the embodiment of evil made lawful, organized, purposeful, directed toward domination by structure and hierarchy, and the patient application of contract and consequence. Demons are the embodiment of evil made chaotic, unstructured, purposeless in the goal-directed sense, devoted to destruction and entropy, and the absence of every ordering principle. They have been fighting each other since before any mortal civilization thought to record history. They fight because they represent genuinely opposed principles, and the opposition between law and chaos is based on everything the planes show us, not a tension that resolves. It grinds. It generates energy. It throws debris across every plane touched by either side. And the residents of those planes have learned to arrange their lives around the resulting turbulence, the way coastal people arrange their lives around the tide. Scholars and philosophers who have spent time in Sigil long enough to be taken seriously have noted a recurring motif running through the structure of the planes, through the way factions organize themselves, through the way conflicts between cosmic principles tend to develop, and sometimes, occasionally, find a third position that neither pure opposition could reach on its own. They observe it the way a careful reader might observe a structural habit in a very long poem, not a rule that the poem is consciously following, but a preference that recurs enough to be worth naming. Things in the planes tend toward 3. Opposing principles tend to produce a third thing that carries something of both without being reducible to either. The outlands themselves could be read this way, as the third position produced by the tension between all the extremes of the outer wheel, the place that is none of them and all of them simultaneously. This is not a law in any codified sense. It is an observation, and like most honest observations about the planes, it is more useful as a lens than as a rule. What it points toward, at its deepest level, is the same thing that everything in Sigil points toward if you follow it far enough. The idea that the multiverse is not a finished thing. It is not a completed structure handed down from some authority and frozen in the shape it currently occupies. It is a process. It is being made continuously by the aggregate weight of what thinking beings believe about it, what they hold to be true, what they are willing to act on, what they are willing to die for or live differently for, or simply whisper in the dark before they fall asleep. The planes shift incrementally and over vast spans of time with the accumulated pressure of belief. And every being that thinks, anywhere in the multiverse, is part of that pressure, whether they intend to be or not. You are standing in Sigil, breathing that copper andrane air that you have been breathing since the moment you stepped through whatever door brought you here. And the question the city has been asking you, threading it quietly through every ward you have walked, and every portal you have passed, and every being you have encountered moving through its impossible ring-shaped streets, is this: what do you believe? Not what do you profess. Not what do you perform for the people around you who expect a particular answer. What do you actually, genuinely, load-bearingly believe about the nature of things? Because in Sigil, that answer is not private. It joins the aggregate. It adds its small, particular weight to the vast and churning calculation that the planes are perpetually performing. It matters in the most direct and literal sense that word has ever been used. The Lady of Pain floats past a corner somewhere above you, unhurried and absolute. The Dabbas repair a section of stonework 2 streets over, their rebuses flickering in the sourceless light and dissolving before you can read them. The portals in every wall and floor and archway around you hold their quiet potential, waiting for the right hand carrying the right key. The great bazaar is filling with the sounds of a new day's first arguments. The Festhal's night archives are closing their doors to the last of the experience seekers, who emerge blinking and tender. And changed in small ways, they will spend the next several days finding words for. Somewhere in the hive, someone is waking up in a city they arrived in through a door they did not entirely mean to open. And they are about to have the same first breath you had, that copper andrane breath. And the city is going to lean in around them the way it leaned in around you. And it is going to begin the same slow, patient process of teaching them what it teaches everyone who stays long enough to listen. There are so many more doors, and you already know what a door in Sigil is worth. Thank you very much for listening.